Well, today was a bit of a different day for me. I decided to listen to conservative talk radio, which is not something I regularly do. Usually, if I turn it on, I kind of get annoyed at the partisanship and sort of the low IQ arguments that are being made, and I kind of just turn it off. But I used to listen to conservative talk radio a lot when I was like in middle school and early high school, before I was really that intellectually developed. And so out of nostalgia, I do tune in from time to time just to hear what what most people are hearing, because conservative talk radio is incredibly influential in the United States on the right. Ordinary Republican voters, that's their dose of politics that they get for the day, comes from people like Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck. And today I decided to listen to Glenn Beck, and I was quite surprised at the things he was saying. I was quite proud of him, because I always had respect for Beck back when I used to listen to talk radio, and since then I've always felt that he was the most intellectually curious person on talk radio. And so today, the topic that he was discussing, much to my shock, something I would have never guessed in a million years, was CIA color revolutions. That is a topic that, if you would have brought it up as a caller on conservative talk radio at any point, since the late 80s when Rush Limbaugh started his show, you would have been chewed out by any host, doesn't matter which host it was, as some kind of left-wing conspiracy theorist who's a hate America firster. How dare you imply that the United States has anything but pure intentions, and that they would do anything to destabilize other countries? Our wonderful, men and women at the CIA, and the great brave members of our intelligence community, they would never overthrow governments, that were elected just because they disagreed with their foreign policy views. And yet today, Glenn Beck got into that quite a bit with an audience. He expressed these, informed people about this history in a very abbreviated manner of things that the U.S. intelligence community has done in places like Ukraine and Georgia and Russia in this century. Cases in which the U.S. national security state has attempted and succeeded to subvert and overthrow governments which they saw as threats to their interests. And the reason that Beck brought all this up is that he feels that such a color revolution could be perpetrated here in the United States to overthrow the administration of Donald Trump. And I must say, this is something that I've kind of been thinking in the back of my head for quite a while now. For years, because that's anyone who knows the CIA playbook can see the way that the media has been talking about Trump, the way that all of the national security experts, so to speak, like John Bolton, or all these people who signed this letter endorsing Joe Biden recently, or the way people talked about Trump in 2016, that he was very much not the kind of person that the CIA was fond of, and they were trying to tie him to people like Putin, specifically because those are the kinds of people that they like to overthrow. But I was not comfortable going so far as to say that I actually thought that the CIA would pull the trigger on such an operation, or that it doesn't have to be the CIA specifically. It could be any flavor of the national security state. But Beck not only went there, he went there and expressed this view of his to a very large and not uninfluential audience of talk radio listeners. And so I think that his case needs to be addressed, since a lot of people are being exposed to the idea that the CIA goes and overthrows these governments, for the first time now. And the only reason why they care is because it would seem as though their president is the one now under threat. And now, obviously, Beck tried to temper this case and present it in a more partisan way than is factually accurate. He only talked about Clinton and Obama and completely skipped over Bush, even though he did cite one example, Georgia, which, the color revolution there occurred during the Bush administration. And obviously, the Bush administration loves overthrowing governments just as much as the Clintons or the Obamas. So it has nothing to do with left-right politics or with Republicans or Democrats. It is simply the national security state, and that's really the only thing I found to disagree with Beck's case on. I thought he laid out a pretty solid case that, you know, this could happen in the United States here come November, because everything we've been seeing in the media really is laying the groundwork for the kinds of color revolutions that we've seen, you know, in the last couple decades. I think that it's safe to say that the media is working much harder this time to delegitimize the results of the election before the election is even held, which is something that, you know, we constantly see. It's something we just saw in Bolivia. It's something that we saw in Belarus, where before the election is, you know, even takes place, the NATO or U.S. friendly opposition will come out and say the election's going to be rigged. The incumbent or whoever we don't like is going to steal the election. And then after that, the election is held, and lo and behold, the opposition loses. And then what do? They say, "See, I told you so." And then they rally their supporters in the streets to go, you know, chant and wave signs and maybe smash some windows to scare the incumbent into resigning. Sometimes this works, and sometimes it doesn't. The Euromaidan protests in 2014 are a good example of when it worked. In that case, there were people, they were out in the streets, and they said, Yanukovych, we want you out. And Yanukovych said, I'm out of here. Same thing happened in Tahrir Square in Egypt during the Arab Spring. The people there were rallied by, you know, with the help of U.S. intelligence assets. You know, they are clearly using the CIA playbook, one which was, I believe, developed originally to take down Milosevic in Serbia. They train these people in organizing so that they can put together, you know, a big protest in a central location to scare the authorities into thinking that they've lost the general will or the popular I just lost my train of thought on the term. Consent to the governed. That's what I was going for. I was thinking, for some reason, I was trying to channel Jefferson, and for some reason Rousseau came out. That's not a good mistake to make. So what are we hearing from the media in the lead up to our election, which is only a few weeks away now? We've been hearing the stories about how Trump is sabotaging the post office, so it's going to screw up all the mail-in voting. Russia is going to try and interfere again and get Trump reelected. I just saw an ad for a new documentary film on Amazon Prime about how the states are suppressing the vote of black and brown people. Of course, it's almost guaranteed that even if Trump can win the Electoral College, he's going to lose the popular vote, which again is another that's another knock against the legitimacy of the election in the eyes of the media. And there's been a lot of talk in the media that this election is very important because it will show whether, you know, democracy in America still exists. Because the idea is that I believe it was in the Atlantic, there was a guy that wrote something to the degree of you know, democracy is supposed to be self-correcting. Sometimes the people make mistakes, but if your democracy works, which these are all it's very heavy CIA code language. Again, democracy means doing what the CIA wants. That's how the term is always used. But anyway, according to this columnist, a CIA hack, of course, democracy is supposed to be self-correcting. So when they make a mistake as egregious as electing Donald Trump, well, then obviously, if the democracy is functioning correctly, then the next time that they're given the chance to, you know, Donald Trump will be voted out of office. And if Donald Trump isn't voted out of office, then then we are inherently undemocratic. See how they set that up? By definition, if Trump is reelected, America's democracy is dead. I mean, hell, look at the tagline now of the Washington Post: "Democracy dies in darkness." And also now we're seeing articles popping up everywhere that, well, what if Trump has to be removed by the military because he'll refuse to step down when he inevitably loses the election, because we know Trump's going to lose. The military has to step in to take him out. All while at the same time we're getting these nonsensical, anonymously sourced stories about how Trump hates the troops, and Trump doesn't want to talk to wounded vets because, oh my gosh, they're losers, they were wounded, these people got shot, who the hell do they think they are, shaking my hand, no, I'll get my hair wet. All of these stories that are supposed to drive a wedge between, a Republican president, which is normally very closely aligned with the military, drive a wedge between him and the military. And of course, Trump came out and said, I did a whole video on this statement because I thought it was the most important statement by a sitting president since Eisenhower's military-industrial complex speech, and that was when Trump said that, the military doesn't love me, the soldiers love me, but the high-ranking officers at the Pentagon hate me because essentially I'm getting in the way of them handing out lucrative defense contracts and enriching their buddies at Raytheon, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin. And so the tension here is palpable heading into the election. We're seeing all the hallmarks, all of the pieces are there for a CIA color revolution. You have a delegitimized election. You have a very divisive / unpopular incumbent, and we're being told the military is not on his side. Having the military opposed to the incumbent that you're looking to overthrow, or rather having a military that is overtly pro-CIA, pro-NATO, pro-EU, pro-America, however you want to look at it, that is, that's how you end up with a coup. Look at Bolivia. Bolivia had a very, let's just say he's an openly left-wing socialist Bolivarian, as they would say in Latin America, president of Bolivia. A guy who was friends with Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro, someone who was not a friend to American business interests. Yet the Bolivian military was educated at the School of the Americas. They were, which is run by the U.S. government. So they were all, pretty well immersed in CIA culture. They were themselves, almost by definition, American assets. And so when the president of Bolivia won re-election, and they didn't want him to, the election was declared illegitimate by the media. And so the military moved in to overthrow him. And we've seen so many cases like this over the history of the American, intelligence community. They've done this time and time again, not just during this century, but in the 20th century as well. I mean, hell, but not the CIA at the time, but a U.S. intelligence community-backed coup is what created the entire country of Panama. Panama was a part of Colombia. So Beck, looking at all these things and recognizing, which again, this is huge for an American conservative talk radio host to recognize that the U.S. has perpetrated all of these coups around the world, time and time again. That they have this same color revolution playbook that they've run over and over again, starting in Serbia. He simply posits the question, hey, at what point? Do we start, wondering, is this going to happen here? Is that what we're being set up for? Because that's the way things are looking. That's the way the media talks about them. And you know what? I almost would have said this, you almost could have said the same thing in 2016, but it's so much more intense now. I think that in 2016, there was real faith that Trump absolutely could not win. It was impossible for him to win. I think there were probably a lot of people who thought that, oh my God, you can't run for president and question the national security state. There's no way you could win. And then he did anyway. So I think that perhaps there was a hubris there. Now, perhaps there's been some more careful planning to ensure that that the privileges of the national security state can be defended in the case of a Trump re-election. And now, just to be clear, I don't think that Trump is some big threat to the deep state like they think. I think that Trump has been kind of I think he's compromised way too much with them. He's brought them into his administration. He had John Bolton working for him for quite some time. He has Mike Pompeo working for him now. Trump did not come in and appoint the kind of people that I would have appointed to be his advisors and his staff. And, as the saying goes, personnel is policy. So Trump has not been, the biggest he's not exactly been what I would call, a major anti-war president. But I guess he's far enough in that direction that the national security state does see him as an imminent threat to their existence. So, assuming this is possible, assuming that the intelligence community has been fomenting a lot of the unrest that we've been seeing, which wouldn't surprise me, because if you look at the media has done a lot to exacerbate these tensions in this country. They've taken all of these police videos of black men being shot. And amplified them, and then projected them through a racial lens to try and make them seem as ghoulishly terrible as possible. And they've presented them in the most divisive way possible, saying that this is a problem of whites versus blacks, and that oh my gosh, the white guys, they're out to kill these black men, and black people, you're under attack. They didn't make it about police brutality. They didn't make it about poverty in America and how it drives certain people from poor communities to pursue careers in the illicit trades. No, every time, no matter the story, they want to present it as, America's an evil, racist place, and you need to be angry about this, and you need to get out in the streets and demand an end to racism, whatever that means. Never demanding anything concrete, never really demanding anything that's going to hurt, the health of the state. And so, I look at this, and I look at the kinds of agitation that the intelligence community has done in other countries. The way that they will take whatever issue they think they can, whatever is the most divisive thing they can to get people angry and to get them out in the streets, they'll use it. So, like in Ukraine in 2014, they had neo-Nazis protesting in the streets against Yanukovych, who were very upset and wanted Yanukovych out. And you would think, boy, isn't Obama supposed to be on the left? Why is he allying with neo-Nazis? Is Obama a secret Nazi? No, it's because they're going to use whoever they can. And the same thing's true here. Are the CIA a bunch of critical race theorists? No, I don't think so. I think they're going to use whatever they can to try and divide this country, to get people out in the streets, if that is in fact their goal. If they are really trying to pull off a color revolution like they have in so many other nations against their own government in their own country, this is how they would do it. So obviously, I don't have concrete evidence of this, which is why I haven't brought it up before. That's why now I'm doing it, in response to somebody else bringing it up, because I didn't really want to go out on a limb like this. But we never know. You never know for a fact that one of these color revolutions is a CIA hit job until decades after the fact. We never get the proof, around the time that it happens. Just like in 1973, in Chile. At the time, you would have been a crazy conspiracy theorist if you blamed that on the CIA, and now we know that the CIA was funding it all along. And it becomes very obvious because they use the same playbook every time because it works. And so I do think that it's quite possible that something like this is being planned as a sort of a contingency, in case that Trump does win re-election, which right now the polls are not looking good for him. But then again, the polls didn't look good for him in 2016. But at this stage, I would not be surprised if the intelligence community has something up their sleeve, because they're telling us right there. It's out in the open. Look at the Transition Integrity Project, which I've talked about before. Lots of people are talking about that right now for good reason. Hillary Clinton came out recently and said Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances. What does she mean by that? She means that if Trump wins, then it's obviously rigged. And so what does all this look like if that is in fact the direction that we're moving? If all of these breadcrumbs really do lead us in that direction, well then after Election Day, let's say, just Trump wins. All the mail-in ballots come in, they're counted, and it turns out that Trump, has, 280 electoral votes or something. Or let's even say 300, just like last time. Well, we're going to hear stories about how all things being lost in the mail and all of it. And again, remember what I was saying about the high rate of mail-in ballots being ruled invalid because of, they were filled out incorrectly. We'll probably hear a lot of stories about that because people will say, oh my gosh, look at the high percentage of votes that have been invalidated across the country in all these swing states. That's obviously because the Republicans were trying to suppress minorities, and they were just saying, oh my gosh, look, this is a black person. Let's invalidate their vote, say they didn't fill it out correctly, and throw their vote out so that Trump will win. And you're going to get stories like this, and then what's going to happen is there's going to be people coming out in the streets. They're going to be, first peacefully protesting, then you're going to see people getting violent. And as more and more people get out in the streets, it's going to grow, because that's how bandwagoning works with these things. This is a part of their studies when it comes to people trying to plot these kinds of coups. It's called a color revolution because the way that they organize these protests is that everyone's supposed to come out wearing the same color or the same article of clothing. So probably, I guess it's going to be black bloc in this case. So you're going to have black bloc protesters in the streets of every city in America, all demanding that that either Trump resign or that their states count all of the votes that were invalidated and try and do something to swing things in Biden's favor, because they're outraged because of all the racism and all the threats to our democracy, and the media is going to be all over this. They're going to be, nodding their heads and saying, yes, Trump stole the election. It's obvious. Everyone can see it. And at that point, Trump will have a choice. He can give in, like Viktor Yanukovych did, or he can dig in his heels, the way that Lukashenko and that Putin and that, other leaders like Maduro have tried to do. And at that point, if the leader that is being targeted by the color revolution, if they do not bend to the will of the mob, if they do not surrender to the revolution, then it turns to the military. The intelligence community then will appeal to their assets within the nation's military, whatever country you're talking about. In a country like the United States, you would imagine that the U.S. military, their officer class is filled with, pro-CIA people. And so the idea then would be that the pro-CIA military would overthrow Trump, just like they overthrew the president of Bolivia, just like they overthrew the president of Chile in 1973. And in doing so, they would restore democracy. There would be some national reconciliation junta that would appoint Kamala Harris to be the president, and things in our country could finally get back to normal. Of course, after the junta passes some emergency laws censoring people on the internet, reimposing the fairness doctrine, effectively ending conservative talk radio, censoring newspapers, perhaps, all in the interest of trying to restore democracy. Because our media, of course, at that point will have been thoroughly subverted by evil Putin, Russia, China, whoever the boogeyman is at the time. And of course, let's not forget about gun control. That will have to be on there, an assault weapons ban passed under emergency powers, and then, the junta will then transition back to, a normal government, and they will want to quickly reimpose a normal presidency, unelected, of course, but, Trump threw the election before. He was he was illegitimate. He stole the election, so we're just going to put Harris in there or somebody else. Maybe Colin Powell. Bring in a Republican and say, look, we're reuniting the country. That's the way that they would plan for this to go. Now, would it necessarily go that way? I doubt it. I mean, these color revolutions don't always work out when they get to the stage to where they try and pull off an actual military coup. When it goes from just riots in the streets and goes to a military coup, you lose a lot of the time. So, for example, in Belarus recently, Lukashenko said, nope, I'm not leaving. I don't care if you people are out in the streets. I'm not going to leave. You're going to have to kill me. And then guess what? The military didn't do anything because the military in Belarus is loyal to Lukashenko. You don't have the CIA running the Belarusian military. Same thing happened in Venezuela. Hugo Chavez was a man of the military. He came out of the military, and when he was in power in Venezuela, he made sure that the military was an institution that was on his side, and that there were no, CIA stooges creeping up through the ranks. And so then when, Guaido attempted his putsch when Guaido came out and said, I'm the legitimate president, and they had people in the streets and Maduro refused to resign, Guaido then declared that the military was going to overthrow Maduro and install him, and then he looked like an idiot because it didn't happen, because John Bolton was lied to, and that's why John Bolton was fired by President Trump. I covered this at the time extensively with all the events in Venezuela. It didn't work because the military was on Maduro's side. And so right now the big question is, if they're going to try something like this against Trump, whose side is the military on? Traditionally, the military would be very pro-Republican. Republican presidents always get along well with the military. They're always they're the stand for the flag crowd. I mean, how would the military not back a Republican president? Well, it's for the reasons that Trump cited not too long ago, that he is a threat. He's seen as a threat to the national security state, to the military-industrial complex. Is he really? I don't think so. I think the military-industrial complex would survive 4 more years of Trump just fine. I don't think he's dismantling them. But they certainly seem to think so. People like Mattis hate him. All the ex-generals who are no longer working in the military hate him. So I would think that the senior officers of the U.S. military, certainly all of the Joint Chiefs, they would be very much in favor of this. And they would be happy to remove Trump to restore their democracy. Now the question is, would the lower officers in the military, when you get down to the less senior officers, would they, to a much lesser degree, yes. In fact, they might even lean no on that. And certainly the rank and file of the military, I don't think, is going to overthrow the president. And so you might end up with a situation very similar to what happened in Spain in 1936 when Franco and his cronies attempted their coup against the Spanish Republic. What you ended up with were a lot of generals who said, you know what, I don't really want to go along with the coup because I swore an oath to the Constitution, and so I need to defend that. And so if you guys want to go outside the Constitution and remove the government, I'm going to have to fight you. And so you ended up with actually some of the military siding with the Spanish Republic over the Spanish military that was trying to impose their new state. And of course, you have to consider that America, unlike most of these countries where the CIA has attempted color revolutions, is a federalized government. We don't just have, a government that's centered in Washington, and that's where all the decisions are made. We also have 50 states, and those have 50 state capitals with 50 state legislatures and 50 state governors. And so where do all of those stakeholders fall when it comes to this? When are all 50 governors really going to pledge their allegiance to the military or whoever the military appoints to be president after they overthrow Trump? Would that really work out well? My guess is that you're going to have a lot of, red state or even swing state governors that say, no, we're going to side with Trump because he won the election. He's the president, and so we recognize him as the president of the United States, in our state. And keep in mind that all those state governors have control over their 50 state National Guards. So they each have a military of their own that they command. And so I'm not bringing all this up to suggest that we're going to see the Spanish Civil War or something like it occur in the United States. All I mean to say is that the idea of the CIA and the intelligence community pulling off a color revolution in the United States itself, not just in some tin pot country in Eastern Europe or some banana republic in Latin America, it's a much bigger deal here. It's a much bigger operation. It would be the most difficult job they've ever pulled off, tougher than overthrowing Putin in Russia, which they, of course, failed to do. And so who knows, maybe the intelligence community has learned enough lessons since they failed to overthrow Putin that they would be able to successfully overthrow the President of the United States, in a similar manner. But I just don't see that coming to pass. You see, these folks, the national security state, the war state, whatever you want to call them, the people who see themselves as the forces of law and order, who are trying to, restore our democracy and save America from this agent of chaos, Donald Trump, I think that if they really, really want to go this route, that they're going to create far more chaos by trying to overthrow a U.S. president. That's just not something that Americans accept. We haven't had a coup here since 1789. And back then, nobody even really knew that the coup happened. And that, of course, was when the Constitutional Convention illegally abolished the Articles of Confederation and replaced them with the U.S. Constitution. But, to do something, like overthrowing a president now in 2020 would be a much bigger deal, obviously. And nobody really, remembers the abolition of the Articles of Confederation. So everything I just discussed is a very serious matter, and it's not the kind of issues that talk radio listeners are normally exposed to. I really, knowing all of this ahead of time, if more people in conservative media start picking up on this and trying to spread this message to their listeners and readers, I don't know what effect that will have too. I mean, that just may throw a wrench in the whole thing to where you immediately on after the election, when all this starts to happen, you have people calling it out. I mean, it's really too soon to tell. And of course, if Biden actually is able to win on his own merits, then all of this will have been for naught, and it won't really matter anyway. But with all this up in the air, it almost makes me want to see Trump reelected, just to see if they really do try and pull this off. Because it would be incredibly ambitious, and in my opinion, doomed to fail. That doesn't necessarily mean that people would just wake up and say, sorry, not today, CIA, we're going to stick with President Trump, and then he just goes out and serves out his 4 terms. I think that it would lead to a lot of chaos and violence, and it would be the last gasp of the United States. Kind of like the coup in 1991 against Boris Yeltsin, trying to preserve the Soviet Union, trying to stop it from collapsing. The Soviet military moved in and tried to impose military rule and end the transition to democracy. But, Yeltsin intervened, and the rest is history, as they say. And that coup ended up being the last gasp of the Soviet Union. It was over after that. That was, when the history books were written, that's where people draw the line. That's the day the Soviet Union came to an end. And so if this is planned and is actually put into practice, then the end of America might be right around the corner, even sooner than I expected. And that, doesn't have to be a bad thing. As long as it doesn't escalate into a violent situation, I think it would be great if people just peacefully decide, that, hey, we don't want to have the same government anymore. We want a different government. And that would be perfectly fine. I wish that we could have, 50 different independent governments, in what is now the United States. Hell, I wouldn't mind 100, 200, 1,000. The more political divisions, the better, because then that's when you get to the point to where the state is much more beholden to its citizens, because it has less citizens. Each individual citizen has a greater influence over the government. So I think I'll go ahead and try and stop here for today and think more about this issue. Maybe come back to the topic at a later date. So if you get anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day and I hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.